So for argument's sake, let's say tomorrow, 5.7 million, those people suddenly found a job, you would still have in excess of, 4.5 million job openings that remain to be fulfilled. So still a testament to how firm our labor market is still performing. But it is cooling. When we look at wage pressures, they are now on an annual basis below 5%. December average hourly earnings for the entire economy, they were up 4.6%, down from 4.8 in November, and above 5% at the end of last year. We do expect contraction or negative jobs sometime in the next couple of months. We expect the unemployment rate to rise to 5.3% from 3.5%, and that would be consistent with recession. But again, we think it's going to be mild. So how does that 5.3% compare? Well, during the COVID recession, which was a very unique recession, the unemployment rate shot up to 14.7%. If we go back to the Great Recession, which is your kind of obvious benchmark because that was a true recession, the unemployment rate went up to 10% because a little bit after the recession began. And then even if you go back further to the 2001 recession, unemployment rate, 2001 was a mild recession. Unemployment rate went to 6.3. So we're looking for, only 5.3. So in that sense, that's how we convey a mild recession. Besides?
Yeah, so we had that unemployment rate ended up to about 4.3% this year. So we have job growth slowing very substantially. We have job growth slowing. The latest print was at 230,000. That came off from the peaks of 500,000 this year. So we are definitely seeing sequential slowing, which is a good thing. The Fed wants to see job growth slowing so that aggregate demand cools off. So we have job growth reaching a low in mid-2023 at about 50,000. So that's very low, and it's actually enough to help put upward pressure on the unemployment rate. We naturally need to be creating 90,000 jobs a month with population growth in order to keep the unemployment rate steady. So the fact that we had job growth on average actually at 70,000 throughout all this year, that's going to help create slack in the labor market. Wage pressures will come off without having to see significant job loss. We've done our own estimates on how large the labor shortage still is today, and based on the level of real output, so how much our economy has been producing, we're still about 2.5 million jobs short. So we've basically been running the economy on fewer resources the last couple of years. I'm sure you guys can all relate. It's been hard to staff people, hard to find skilled workers. Everyone feels like they're working too much, and it's true. We definitely been running the economy on fewer workers. And so when we look at this year, even though growth is slowing and consumer spending is coming up, we think that companies by and large are going to be more hesitant to lay off the skilled workforce that they found, and that's been so hard to retain. And we're going to see more weakness in some of these smaller pockets. So construction, which is more tied to the housing market, but they also have their own structural labor shortage issues, and then tech and financial services as well.
I agree. I think that from my perspective, to understand how the labor market is going to be motivated in 2023 is really very, very, very difficult. Let me just bring retail numbers. The most recent job openings and layoff data from the BLS now this is a month ago, we had 877,000 openings, 724,000 hires. And if you looked at how many people were unemployed, retail unemployed, we had, if we take the number of people that are unemployed and the number of openings, we have 1.3 openings for every person that's claiming unemployment. Now, this is a very different industry today than it was pre-pandemic. We had to change a lot. And it's been challenging for a lot to find people. My view is that I think we'll run around maybe 70 to 90,000 average monthly for the year. We could see some backsliding, but I think it's been difficult. And I think in the service industry in particular, so it's outside retail, but this is where the hardest part of the pandemic hit. And I think that in some ways, I feel that that's going to help us compared to other past recessions. If you look at other recessions, in past recessions, it's the good industries that fall off the most, not the service industries. And that was just the opposite, actually, during the Great Recession. We lost a lot of jobs in services as well as the goods. And now here we are. We had the worst effect in the most recent because of the pandemic. But in terms of one last thing, it's a small minor one, but for those people who are looking at the data, there will be some revisions in the February 3rd release. They will re-estimate what happened in 2020, not in early March of 22. So according to what we were told, there was like 450 to 600,000 more people working than the data was so far released. I want to go back to another point. Wages, average hourly earnings, 4.6%. What's the employment cost index running about? It's the third quarter, I forget.
So we're running about 1.3% Q over Q. We had it coming in about 5% for it.
So help me along with this thought process. I'm looking at the PCE, personal consumption expenditures. This is the other inflation index. It was 5.5% in November overall. Now, you can get retail data, subset data on this. And there is a category called GAFO, which is general merchandise, apparel, furniture, and other, and that is 3.4%. So when I think about a consumer and I'm able to get 4% of the rate, because in my retail costs, or what's being shown to me, is right now 3.4 and probably falling, I can kind of get by, except for a couple of categories, and that would be food in particular. Is there something wrong with that analysis? I mean, I'm thinking that retail could still do okay, the consumer could do okay, even with an ongoing inflationary environment, but also with wages at least for the kinds of goods that you talk about. What's your reaction to my analysis?
So I'm glad you brought this up. We've seen negative income growth in 2022. So we're coming at about 3% year-over-year consumer spending for 2022. In a time where real income growth was, I think, almost negative 6% year-over-year, nominal about negative 2%. So how did consumers spend so much with income growth down? A lot of that was rolling off of all the fiscal stimulus from 2021, so there's some tough base effects. But then a lot of it was inflation, right? You've been dealing with 7 to 9% inflation all year, so that's basically eroding all of the income gains from wages, from job growth that consumers were seeing. So I really look at the excess savings stockpile that helped get consumers through this year and stimulate very strong consumer spending. 2023, less excess savings can be less of a driver than consumer spending, but wages are stickier than inflation. So we have inflation coming down towards 3%. Wage growth is also coming off, but slower. And so what we're actually going to see is real income growth for 2023 and positive real wages in the back half of the year. And this is really important. If you get back to the fundamentals of consumer spending, people typically spend each month how much they make, and most of that is labor income. It's not because they have an excess savings stockpile that's never existed before. So I agree with you that I think that these real income gains and real wage gains for 2023 are definitely going to help keep consumers afloat. And that's one of the big parts of our consumer outlook as well.
Can you make comments?
Sure. No, I do agree with Sarah in terms of the excess savings. So at the peak of pandemic, with the fiscal stimulus and then other program, child care tax credit, consumers amassed $2.2 trillion. So, trillion, big number, what does that really mean? Well, consider that the size of the U.S. economy in nominal terms is 24 trillion. So 2.2 out of 24 trillion is about 10%. So think of it as an ROE, correctly. If you get a 10% return on equity, you'll pocket some of it. Yeah, I'm going to go spend that on goods and services, which is what U.S. consumers did. As of the latest data on November personal income and consumer spending data, which is where the savings data is reported, that excess savings is now 1.2 trillion. So consumers have been using up their savings, and based on that current burn rate, we believe by this September, the excess savings will be completely extinguished. So there is still some degree of a tailwind for consumers from excess savings, but it is being drawn down as we move forward.
We'll take some questions in a few more minutes, but I forgot to tell you that we do plan to have some Q&A in a few minutes, so get prepared. Okay, we're talking about consumer spending, this buffer. What about consumer credit? Total consumer credit is up. Revolving credit is grown. Is this something that we should worry about? Is this a concern? As you're thinking of more, for lack of words, and dramatic loss in the economy, how do you see use of credit right now, and is it a concern as we go forward?
So I think in yesterday's keynote speeches by key retail executives, there was cautious was the term used for first half, and delinquencies are starting to rise, particularly for those with lower credit scores, and credit card balances are also starting to rise, meaning that consumers are now taking on credit to maintain their spending in the still high inflation rate. We've seen the same thing. Yes, delinquencies are starting to pick up and balances are rising, but when we compare it to other previous downturns in the U.S. Economy, there are still nowhere near, signals where they would be flashing red. They're still flashing yellow. So, but the thing is, once delinquencies start rising, they continue to rise. So it is something we are continuing to watch.
We're more worried about this for the subprime consumer. We're always seeing concerning delinquency rates for the most subprime auto borrowers. These are the lowest income households. FICO scores under 550 have started to rise. For across the board, prime still remains very healthy. For credit card, we have seen this acceleration in delinquency, but we're just getting back to 2019 levels. So they're still extraordinarily low. And I just think that this is going to set up for a tough year for the lower income households. We know that banks are tightening lending standards at the same time that inflation's still high, and lower income households are going to need to lean more on consumer credit. So it's going to create more of a tough environment for this group. The reality is they make up a very small share of overall consumer spending in the U.S. economy. So even if we have a more recessionary environment for lower income households, middle high income households drive the vast majority of consumer spending. And so I do think that we're probably going to see further deterioration in this data in line with the slowly labor market, and this is going to put more stress on lower income households. I think one really interesting statistic is that over 90% of household debt is locked in at a fixed rate. And that's because almost 99% of mortgages are fixed rate mortgages. So for the average person who owns a home, they're not really being directly impacted by higher interest rates. It's good to start to feed through over time, but they're very resilient. That's 15% higher than prior to the financial crisis. So we're in a much sturdier environment. If you don't own a home, so the lowest income group, 50% of your debt is consumer credit revolving rate. So you can see there's an inequality aspect to tighter monetary policy. It's more immediately impacting lower income households, but for the average household that's just not going to move homes, right? They still have a 3.5% mortgage rate.
Oh, I don't know if the Sun's release, it came out a couple weeks ago. I think it was from Bank of America. And they came out with a report that stated that the lower income cohort, the ratio of credit card to debit card spending is the same as it was in November of 2019. So that lower income cohort is getting hit, but for some reason they're managing it much better perhaps than you might think. I'm not trying to say they aren't having trouble, but it's a challenge. Let's kind of turn to just recent activity. I know there's going to be a question on, well, how did the holiday season turn out? And I'll go at it. Our official numbers don't come out till Wednesday, so I don't have a solid number to tell you. Our forecast was between 6 and 8%. October turned out to be pretty strong, much better than perhaps maybe thought to be. We forecast for November and December. By the way, we take out motor vehicles, we take out gasoline, and we take out food and services. So if you follow the NRF analysis, we thought between 6 and 8%. And the way that the rhythm of spending this year was a little different because of October, when we had these real deal days that came out, not just the Amazon Prime, but Target came out, Walmart. We had a number of things going on in October. And so I think it pulled forward some spending. It was kind of slow in the first few weeks of November. Then it picked up the week before Thanksgiving. And it did okay with that long weekend. Not great, but not great. But on the other hand, then we go into December, we had the same phenomenon going. From my reports, is that it was slow the first week or two, and then it came on strong the week before Christmas and stayed strong the week after Christmas. So, I think it's going to be a number that I won't be too surprised, but I know you guys have some estimates for retail sales to come out. But so in terms of holiday sales, I'm hopeful that we'll hit our target. He'll probably be on the low end of that range, but I think that there was some momentum that helped us out. One of the things that did and will probably not show up directly, but indirectly, was the fact that we had that big holiday storm that came across the United States, the frigid weather. It could really hurt a lot of retailers and for consumers that are dependent on getting out. But on the other hand, it probably helped some retailers, especially with cold weather, apparel, etc. And of course, we believe, based on some stories that I've heard, that if you couldn't go out to buy the gifts because of the weather, you might have gone to gift cards. And so, as everyone knows, I'm sure you've known about gift cards, they don't get calculated into the figures until they're used. So that probably happens in January. So that could be part of the analysis. But that's sort of my estimate right now, without an official release until Wednesday. Could be providing that. I don't know how your thoughts are, specifically retail sales for the holiday or retail sales just in general.
Yeah, I think that holiday shopping, people showed up, but it was softer compared to last year. I think there was more of a focus on experiential gifts than home goods. And whenever I talk to clients, I survey them on their own holiday shopping, and they said they spend less on gifts, but they spent a lot more on their Christmas vacation. So I think that was kind of across the board for everybody. We do know that for retailers, there's pretty heavy discounting this year. We have our own survey at Morgan Stanley. It's called the Alphawise Consumer Pulse Survey, and our survey found that 70% of consumers were going to wait till they saw discounting of 20% or more to start shopping. So kind of in line with what you said, that we saw another wave of shopping later in December that we typically might not see. People were waiting for the heavy discounting this holiday season. We know that, for example, apparel probably discounting the most, and some of the electronics and appliances suppliers as well.
Any thoughts?
So I think I'd agree with that. That was could be better than, slightly better than the 6 to 8% that you're looking for. but after they'll be down from the double-digit period that we saw in 2021. Same exact thing. There was the heavy discounting, which brought forward sales in October, and
which probably relieves some of the inventory also that you didn't talk about that at all. But we know that in some segments, simply it had backlog of inventory, but that's not across all retail. And then it probably was more concentrated, from what I understand, in maybe more in the apparel area.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to clear shelves.
Yeah, because if I look at some of the inventory sales ratios, they seem to be in line in general, even with their 20-year average. In some cases, they're below their 20-year average. And for whatever the 20-year average is worth to you, but I mean, it kind of gives you a perspective. We cut down considerably the amount of inventory we used to keep even 10 years in retail. Any closing thoughts before we take any Q&A?
I would just say that we're also very focused on the payroll data that's going to come out in February. Last year, the payroll numbers got revised up by almost 400,000 when they came in. That hadn't even started hiking interest rates yet. So that data came in, and it signaled to the Fed that they needed to get on it and tighten monetary policy. And so I think it's going to be really important, as the Fed's made it very clear that they're data dependent. So however these payroll revisions come in, if they're significant, I think it is going to impact their decision making at the March meeting and how high they decide to go.
Ken, before taking in Q&A, any close your comment?
Sure. So in regards to the Federal Reserve, we think the good news is that in a couple of months from now, the Fed will be done with its rate hiking cycle. So we do expect 3.25% increases in the federal fund rate target. So February, March, and May. So bringing the key policy rate from 4.5% to just north of 5%, 5.25%. We already think that the 10-year yield has peaked. It was as high as 4.25% about 2 months ago. 10-year yield is important for long-term borrowing, short, medium-term borrowing, capital costs for corporations. And now the 10-year yield is 3.5%, so down nearly 75 basis points, which is a pretty substantial decline for the 10-year yield. So I would say, even though we do expect a recession, with a longer-term perspective, we think the Fed will be done in a couple of months, and the 10-year yield may have peaked already.
Do you think the Fed will start cutting with the real we're in a recession?
We have that is one difference with our forecast. So yes, we do expect the Fed to cut rates at the end of this year because of our beliefs that the U.S. economy will enter a recession.
Yeah, I have the Fed really just going up above 59 basis points. Down, and I think they hold out and they watch closely on what develops. I'm not convinced that they're going to want to move real quick. I forget. My forecast is a much milder development. We're talking recession. And how we label it is interesting because the official arbiter of recessions is the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they don't look at GDP back-to-back quarters. I mean, it's part of their analysis. There's 3 or 4 other indicators that are included in industrial production, retail sales, I think personal income. So I think they're in an unenviable position right now trying to discern, especially because I haven't brought this up, but we could have brought it up, is that there's these lags in effect, the combined effects of all of the tightening has occurred. We haven't seen the full impact, and probably will be seeing it in the first quarter or so, and how it relates to spending. So I'm going to stay on a sort of 50 basis points max this year, and I'm holding on. So one last thing, I want to take questions, but I'm anticipating one. We didn't talk about online at all. And I don't know, maybe we should wait for a question on it to decide whether or not you want to answer. So we have two people in the room at one end. Lonnie is down at the very end over there, and she has a microphone. And Chloe, you're over here, down here. And please just raise your hand, and they'll bring the microphone to you. And I know we have a question right here, and we'll two over here. And I'll take this person's first. Please.
Karina Mitchell from CGGM America, term of one. Lead into the e-commerce, but I'll start off with this from Eddie or all of the panel. What does the shopping landscape look like for this year? Depending on who you ask, and the session could be looming. APR average rates are 19.6% on credit cards at the moment, the highest it's ever been. It's not just low income, it's middle income and high income earners who are now shifting where they look for their, to make their purchases. Looking at, places like Target and Walmart to do their shopping. So how does that sort of impact what retailers need to consider? Which retailers are the ones that will come out ahead?
Well, we're not in a position to make any specific recommendations on any one company, okay? And I hope that that's probably your destroy too. I think we got to think about what your financial obligations are relative to your income. So while interest rates are at that rate, and that will be a deciding factor on how people spend, but the amount of obligations has occurred relative to recent times, but at the same time, income has picked up. And so it's managing that monthly outlay for that credit card. Yeah, it's at 25%, but at this point, I am not concerned yet that we are really going to have a credit crunch problem from a consumer standpoint. It's high, but not everybody uses credit the same way. And as I mentioned, Bank of America just pulled out because debit cards and credit cards had not changed any differently than where it was before the pandemic. I think people are managing that part of it. That's my view, and I don't know how others speak to it.
Well, I would agree on the interest rates, but in terms of where consumers are going to put their money this year, so we have the savings rate rising back up this year, and so there's just going to be a smaller spending basket for consumers. We think a lot of that is going to come from goods spending, so goods is where there's been a lot of the overconsumption of large and retail, and so home goods, electronics, appliances, that's where some of the headwinds are going to be, and just a lot of trade down within that. I mean, we've already seen some trade down in some of the earnings reports that we offer at Walmart, at Target, across high and middle income. And then it's just going to be a services year. So services spending has been on this tremendous V-shaped recovery in 2022. That's got to slow down this year. So maybe it starts to slow back towards trend growth. But services are 65% of consumer spending. So even if we see more weakness at retail, services are still expected to hold up. People still have very strong intentions to spend on experiences instead of things. And that also is reflected in the labor market, right? Because we spend so much on services in the U.S., similarly, 65 to 70% of our job market, the services industry as well. They're very different than Europe. That's a lot more manufacturing heavy, smaller services economy. So that's just where we're thinking about where dollars are going to be more frugally allocated to this year.
Okay, Alani, you had a question. We'll go down here, and then we're going to come over here, Chloe, in this group.
Nick Stir from RSM. Just curious to get your guys' insights. For the last year and a half, companies have done a pretty good job of passing costs on to the consumer, right? And as we see these prices decrease, margin is going to become an issue. Just want to get your insights in next year, what that looks like for companies.
Chad, sure. You're the CFA.
Well, certainly the passing along of costs by companies, that's why corporate profits have remained still very solid, even as of Q3. Certainly as inflation comes down, how much will finished goods prices remain high to, protect that margin or maintain that margin. We are already seeing volume they're coming down in terms of sales, but because of the high inflation, there is less volume being sold for certain retailers. Going into recession, that's going to put further pressure on margins. And whenever you look at corporate profits on back to the 1950s, whenever we've had a U.S. economic recession, you do see corporate profits fall off markedly.
Okay. And they go on to it.
They do that.
What was your, please?
Hi, it's Barbara Dow from Co by U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Very little has said up just in general about the work from home revolution. And I'm wondering how, if you're starting to factor that into your forecast and how you think about things and what the impact has been and how is it going to sustainably change retail?
So we've done a lot of work on work from home and this life after COVID. So during the peak work from home, we had about 30 or 40% of the workforce working full-time or part-time from home. That's come down a bit, but not substantially. And that's, our longer-term outlook is that comes down by about half, as we move through COVID. So we're structurally going to have more people working from home. And what does that mean? So I said near-term outlook, home goods are going to come off because there's been overconsumption. But if you have more people working from home, there's a higher replacement rate on your durable goods because you're wearing them down faster. So I do think that this work from home environment creates a more, better long-term outlook for home-related spending because our life is just more centered around the home. In the near term, what's really interesting here, and we're seeing this be reported by LinkedIn and Indeed on what types of jobs people are looking for and what type of jobs people are hiring for. Everybody's looking for work from home jobs. We can see it in the surges, and people are not looking to hire work from home employees anymore. We know that the biggest labor shortages are in the services sector, leisure, hospitality. You need to be in person for these types of jobs. So we're starting to see a bit of friction in the workforce now. People want the work from home, but people don't want to hire for it anymore. There's some nuances in the near-term outlook versus the longer term, but we do think work from home is here to stay.
I think he is there.
Yes. And in the sense the Associated Press, given the uncertain economic environment, how are stores approaching inventory this year?
Well, I'm going to answer that as best as I can. I think they're obviously going to be managing in a very tight way. In some ways, this is my view without really a lot of data. I think they're going to be very cautious because of what happened last year. And because of the certain stores overbought. And it's very difficult, as you all know, that especially in the apparel industry, in retail, your orders are put in 6 to 7 months in advance. So they are ready to start putting out that spring merchandise. And in fact, it was interesting, the Lowe's chairman this morning was saying, from their standpoint and a whole improvement, the holidays are not their big season. It's the April and May, and that's what they're gearing for. And they already believe that they're in a good position. So it's going to be dependent on what sector you're in, I suppose. But certainly inventory is a critical path. It has to be maintained. It has to be stored. Inflation impacts that. So at this point, I mentioned that in most cases, the inventory sales ratios seem to be pretty much aligned, except in the general merchandise, there's still got a retraceable with it. It's my best guess right now. I don't know if you guys... So Lonnie, you have some questions down there? Right behind you. Yeah.
Hi, Jathan Pizer from the Washington Post. I've heard a lot of talk this weekend about the buy now, pay later, and I'm curious. And they're saying that a lot of really young shoppers, Gen Z, are really leaning into that. And I wonder what your thoughts are of that with all of these. When you're talking about the debt and everything, because it seems like this is their way of spending, or they're going to be leaning into it more.
Why don't you...
Yeah. I think as buy now, pay later, companies are going to start pulling back their offerings. It's just going to be, it's a lot tougher for BNPL companies to get the funding now. We're seeing a lot of liquidity drying up. Markets are tough. And people are not going to be as able to pay down their debt, especially if we start to see more swelling in the labor market. We already know that banks, so the big banks, Bank of America, they're tightening their lending standards, right? They're not being as generous on credit card offerings, auto loan offerings, and so that's going to flow through into BNPL as well. And so I think for those types of companies, it's going to be a very tough year, and I don't necessarily think that there's going to be as much offering for it.
I think there's another question down that way. You have room for a few more before we have to cancel.
Or it's Tiffany app. I actually have two questions. The first of which is, do you feel like last year's holiday seasonality, where